Hello everyone and welcome to AP Psychology Review number 1. My name is Achyutha and today I will be doing a brief overview of the psychology exam for 2020 as well as reviewing an FRQ. Here's the exam we'll be taking in 2020. You will have 45 minutes to take the exam online and it will only cover units 1 through 7. Unit overviews. Unit 1. Scientific Foundations of Psychology. Unit 2. Biological Basis of Behavior. Unit 3. Sensation and Perception. Unit 4. Learning. Unit 5. Cognitive Psychology. Unit 6. Developmental Psychology. Unit 7. Motivation, Emotion, and Personality. During the 45-minute period, you will be given 2 FRQs to write. The first one is 25 minutes long and will deal with the application of concepts that you've learned throughout the year. The second FRQ will be 15 minutes long, and it will be based on research methods that you've learned throughout the year. After that brief overview of the exam, let's jump into an FRQ. A researcher designs a study to investigate the effects of feedback on perception of incomplete visual figures. Each participant stares at the center of a screen while the researcher briefly projects incomplete geometric figures one at a time at random positions on the screen. The participant's task is to identify each incomplete figure. One group of participants receives feedback on the accuracy of their responses. A second group does not. The researcher compares the mean number of figures correctly identified by the two groups. Part A. Identify the independent and dependent variables in the study. So, Question 1 Part A asks us to identify the independent and dependent variables. In order to do this, we must know what the independent and dependent variables are. The independent variable is the factor that is manipulated in a study or experiment. This just means that it is the thing that is changed throughout the experiment, or it is not constant between the two groups. Looking back at the question, we can see that the difference between the two groups is one receives the feedback on the accuracy of their responses, while the other does not. This means that the independent variable would be if the groups receive the feedback on their responses. The dependent variable is the observable, noticeable result of changing the independent variable. It is the measurable factor that is collected after the experiment, or the data that is collected during the experiment. The question states that the researcher compares the mean number of figures correctly identified by the two groups. This means that the researcher is comparing the average of the final scores. Therefore, we can tell that the dependent variable is the final score of the participants. Now that we know what the independent and dependent variables are, we can write our response. The independent variable for this experiment would be if the groups were given feedback on the accuracy of their responses. The dependent variable for this experiment would be the final scores that the participants got for identifying the right shapes. Part B. Identify the role of each of the following psychological terms in the context of the research. Part B of question 1 asks us to identify the role of each of the following psychological terms. This means that the question wants you to identify how the term interacts with the experiment or could affect the results. In order to do this, we must know what each of the terms means in the context of psychology. Foveal Vision. The fovea is part of the eye that resides inside the retina and provides sharp vision, allowing the person to see clearly. The role that foveal vision plays is in the clarity of the image that is seen by the participant. Feature detectors. These are neurons in the occipital lobe that respond to specific features such as shapes or angles. The role that feature detectors play in this experiment is that they allow the participant to see the partial shapes and angles that are portrayed as the incomplete figure. Gestalt principle of closure. This principle states that the brain will perceive shapes and figures by closing the lines in between the visible parts. The role that this plays in the experiment is that it will be able to close the parts of the figure that are incomplete, making a full geometric shape, and revealing the shape to the participant. Now that we know the definitions of the terms, and we know what role they play in the experiment, we can write our sample response. The role that foveal vision has in terms of the research is that it will help the participant to see the incomplete figures clearly. The feature detectors will help the participants figure out which shape the incomplete figure is supposed to be, because they identify shapes and angles. The Gestalt principle of closure would allow the participant to identify the incomplete figure because it would fill in the lines of the shapes and reveal what it should be. Part C. Describe how each of the following terms relates to the conclusions that can be drawn based on the research. In Part C of the question, we are asked to describe how each of the following terms are related to the conclusion. Once again, we must know what the terms mean in the context of psychology before we are able to describe their effect on the result of the experiment. Random assignment. This is a method of equalizing the groups so that the groups themselves and the results do not contain any biases. It is also used to reduce the confounding variables. This relates to the results of the experiment because it is able to show the validity of the study. Statistical significance. This is the probability that the results of the experiment did not occur by chance. This relates to the conclusion of the experiment because it is able to show a high amount of accuracy for the results. Now that we know what the terms mean and how they affect the conclusion of our study, we can write our sample response. Random assignment could relate to the conclusion of the experiment because it was one of the steps that the researcher took in order to reduce the confounding variables and make the experiment more scientifically sound. This, in turn, makes the conclusion of the experiment more valid. Statistical significance could relate to the conclusion of the experiment because it is able to show the accuracy of the experiment, because it would mean that 5% or less of the results were due to chance. Now that we've responded to all parts of the question completely and accurately, let's organize them into neat paragraphs. Here are some final things to remember when taking your AP Psychology FRQ. There's no need to label the parts of your FRQ. The people who will grade the AP Psychology exam will read all of the parts. This means that if you forget a part, you can always put it in later in your FRQ. Make sure you answer the question completely, and make sure to describe and explain when asked to do so, rather than just identifying. This will ensure that you get all the points that you're going for. Finally, answer the question with the most efficiency and accuracy possible. There's not a lot of time to write these exams, so the better you write and the more efficiently you write, the better your exam will turn out. Thank you for watching this AP Psychology review. If you liked the video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or suggestions, leave them in the comment section below. But for now, that's all from me, and thank you for watching.